Thank you all for coming. I've been waiting for this day for 8 years.
Ja, så lang tid har Michael Sheridan faktisk arbejdet på sin bog, der i dag blev præsenteret i Heringsgård på Christianshavn, om guldalderen for danske enfamiliehuse. Bogen beskriver og illustrerer, hvordan de store danske arkitekter fra omkring 1950'erne tegnede og byggede deres egne hjem. Men hvad får dog en arkitekt fra New York til at vise så stor en del af sit liv til danske enfamiliehuse?
The reason that I focused on enfamiliehuset is that the small size, the scale of these houses, and the simplicity of the program allows the architectural ideas to come through in a very clear and expressive way. And the quality that all these houses share, or the qualities, is a special character such that you look at the house, you look at the pictures in the book, and you're not certain whether they were designed in the 1950s or the 1970s or the 1990s. And the reason that they have that somewhat mysterious quality is that they were built at a very, very basic level, in a very simple way, with a great attention to human comfort and a concern for materials and craftsmanship. There's nothing pretentious or showy about these houses, just a very humanistic attention to practical matters and also to beautiful, rich experiences.
Mange af husene fra 50'erne fik stor betydning for hele den bølge af typehuse, som blev bygget i den sidste halvdel af 1900-tallet.
The DNA for most of those parcel houses was established in the early 50s in these very inexpensive houses constructed by people like Jorn Utzon, the architect of Sydney Opera House, or Karen and Ebbett Clemenson. These young architects were starting out working at the beginning of their careers, and they were able to get state loans, low interest loans from the government to build their own houses, typically 110 to 130 square meters. And the economy, or the low budgets, forced them to make more with less. And in fact, the houses that they constructed changed the thinking about what a single family house in Denmark could be. And 10 years later, a lot of the basic lessons from these houses are translated into the mass-produced houses.
Men hvilken betydning har arkitektur overhovedet for folks hverdag?
Quality architecture, buildings and interiors, environments that are designed for people, rather than abstract sculptures or independent artistic statements, can make an enormously positive change in people's lives, because when an architect is doing his job properly, he's really imagining how it will be to use those spaces to experience that building or that interior. And it's, great architecture is, on the one hand, very, very beautiful to be in and to experience, but at the same time, it forms a sort of background for people. It's a framework for living. And when the setting has been designed with variety and richness and a concern for texture and light, and also for the very pragmatic routines of day-to-day life, that really impacts how we feel and how we use those spaces and how we think.
Mange af Københavns nye bydele, som er bygget i de sidste 10-20 år, bliver kritiseret for at være uden liv og for ikke at være bygget for mennesker. Hvorfor er det mon sådan?
Today, projects are done at this enormous scale, at the size of city blocks or super blocks. And so you lose a lot of the small scale, a lot of the human scale aspects when you're building at very, very large buildings. And of course, there's always a pressure to make buildings cheaper and cheaper to construct and to operate. And oftentimes, when you build something completely new, something very large, and everything is new all at the same time, you miss the feeling of history and the accumulation of texture, the richness that we experience in historic buildings.
Is that something you have experienced when you see the newly constructed buildings in Copenhagen?
In some parts of Copenhagen, yes. If I go to South Harbor or I go out to Ørstad, I see it's like an instant city. And as you say, instant cities don't really work. It takes decades. It's a process. It's almost like geology. There's an accumulation and building up of layers and a richness that's very, very hard to produce all at one time.
And what about if you make new buildings in historical parts as the one we are in here? Is there any special ways you have to behave, you think?
Well, I think one very important quality for architects to have is modesty. Architects should realize that they are a link in a very long chain, or kæde, that goes back in time and goes forward into the future. So when people are building and constructing buildings, they should realize that they're not just building for now, they're building for 50 years from now and 100 years from now, and that the city as a whole is much more important than any single building.